I'm Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Saturday. Time for another Loki-related video, and we're going to be revisiting the story about the building of Asgard's walls. As I've gotten better acquainted with Loki, he's been, nudging me to re-examine the myths with fresh eyes and an open mind. And this week I'm taking a closer look at how Asgard's walls came to be and what we might be able to learn from that. So in case you're not familiar with the story, here's a really quick overview. The gods were concerned with security in Asgard. Although they had the Bifrost and you had Heimdall standing guard all the time, it was decided that what was really needed was to build a fortress, complete with walls. Now, while they were in the planning stages, an architect paid them a visit. He was a stranger to all of the gods, and he offered to do the building work. And his fee was the sun, the moon, and Freya. It's not much, just the sun and the moon and Freya. Naturally, the gods were absolutely up in arms over his audacity to ask such a thing. Any one of those things would have been quite outrageous, but to ask for all of them and Freya on top of that, it really was beyond the pale. Loki saw this as an opportunity, though. Everyone else was ready to kill this would-be architect, but Loki saw the opportunity within it, and he suggested that they accept the offer, but that they set terms that would make it impossible for the architect to fulfill his side of the bargain. Thus, they wouldn't have to give up the sun, the moon, or Freya. So the big condition that the project had to be completed within a very specific period of time, which was far too short a period of time for the wall to actually be built. Now, the architect accepted, which should have made everyone suspicious, but we'll get into that later. But he did ask permission that he be allowed to utilize his horse, who was called, I'm going to butcher the name, so I'm sorry, Svadilfair. So the gods heard this, they shrugged, and they didn't think that using the horse would really make a difference or put the odds in his favor, so they agreed to the bargain. Okay. Work goes forward, and before long it becomes apparent that this architect is going to be able to meet his deadline. The gods are horrified by this turn of events, and they have zero willingness to pay their bills. So they decided, instead of coming together to come up with a plan, that really this is all Loki's fault, and they declared they would kill him if he didn't sort things out for him. So Loki transformed himself into a mare, and he managed to distract the horse, and this rendered it impossible for the wall to be built on time, because it was only with the help of that horse that the architect was making any progress at all. And so the gods, didn't have to pay up, essentially. Naturally outraged, which is, pretty understandable, he was swindled, the architect marched into Asgard. In the course of this, it was revealed that his true identity was actually Hrimthurs, and he was a giant, and he had actually been in disguise the whole time. He didn't appreciate being defrauded. A fight broke out, and it was only with the timely return of Thor with his hammer that the gods were able to win the day, and Hrimthurs was killed. After a period of time, Loki gave birth to Sleipnir, who was the eight-legged horse, and who became Odin's favorite mount. This incident had larger consequences, as in down-the-road type of consequences, and it did set the gods up for future problems, and those problems would all contribute to their ultimate downfall and for Ragnarok to eventually take place. So let's move on to what have we learned from this part of the video? I want to really draw two lessons from it. The first is that avoiding work and attempting to evade responsibility creates bigger problems. If the gods had decided to do the work themselves, it may have taken longer, but they would have been beholden to no one. They wouldn't have entered into an agreement that they had no intention of honoring. Let's not forget that this was not set up with honest intentions. I think that's important to keep in mind as we examine these stories. They also wouldn't have had to resort to setting unreasonable terms or demanding that one of their own engage in sabotage. The gods also could have chosen to make inquiries about this architect who just turned out of the blue. They didn't know who he was, and if they had done a little investigation and found out, they probably would never have gotten mixed up with him in the first place. And of course, this led to the gods being attacked in their own homes, mind you, and certainly damage would have been sustained in that fight. And of course, again, if Thor hadn't come home when he did, the outcome could have been much worse than it was. And as another facet of this situation, I mean, let's not forget news travels, even in myth. And keep in mind that the gods already had bad relationships with the Jotun, and this event certainly didn't improve things. You don't want people to think that you're not going to uphold your side of an agreement. It makes trust impossible, makes diplomacy impossible. And of course, this means that the very beings that the gods wanted to keep shut out of Asgard became much more likely to attack it and to feel honestly justified in attacking it. The second lesson I want to really bring home is that it's easier to blame other people than it is to blame ourselves. Despite fully participating in creating the situation and being aware of potential pitfalls and the ultimate cost if things didn't go their way, when things did go against the gods, they just blamed Loki. Funny how that works. The gods want a wall built, but didn't want to bear the cost. Loki figures out a way for them to achieve their goals, albeit through underhanded means. Then, when Hrimhurs was beating the odds, the gods blame Loki. I mean, it wasn't like he was the horse who was helping him, but yes, it was Loki's fault. And then they make sabotaging Thrymhurs to be Loki's sole responsibility on pain of death. Fix this or you'll be executed. The gods could have chosen to acknowledge that this turn of events occurred, and while they hadn't expected it to come out this way, nevertheless they had all played a part. They could have plotted together to come up with a solution, but no, the choice was to blame Loki, make him do all the work. It was easier, and wanting to do the easy thing is what created the situation to start with. Everyone was responsible for getting into that mess, and everyone should have pitched in without malice. No one in this story has clean hands, so I find it very telling that Loki was made the sole scapegoat in that. And of course, human beings do this too, especially if we go into a dishonest situation, knowing even if we may not want to admit it to ourselves, but we know what we're up to, and then things go south, and then we try to find someone to blame and pretend it was that yahoo so and so, it was their fault, while ignoring the role that we played in making the mess. I think it's interesting that it's stories like these that have survived the centuries, both in the written and oral form. And, the gods do nudge us not to just continue telling the stories, but also to think about what they mean. So why encourage the preservation of stories in which nobody comes out looking all that good? Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the mythology that we've inherited represents what the gods were up to at a much earlier point in their lives. And it's my personal belief that the gods do continue to learn and to grow, and that our own capacity to do the same is actually a reflection of them. So if my theory is correct, then the stories in which the deities are making mistakes, I think that's the gods trying to teach us through example of, here's what you don't do. And in essence, it's a message of, you see what happens when you do this kind of thing. You see all the trouble it causes. Learn from that. Avoid these behaviors in your own life. What was the point of us having this experience if you aren't going to learn from it? Another reason we keep telling these stories and why it's important that we do is because every generation of people has to learn lessons for themselves. So if we can share examples of lessons that the gods or other humans have learned, hopefully that means that people don't always choose to learn things the hard way. Maybe they can look at something and say, I definitely don't want to be doing that, or to look at something else and like, that probably would lead to a good outcome for me. I mean, we're all going to find ourselves guilty of having to learn something the hard way, but if we don't have to do that every time, then, it's a step in the right direction. So that's what I got out of this particular myth. I have something slightly different planned for next week for the Loki-centric video, but I'd be curious to hear what you think about this story, about any lessons that you've gleaned, how you think we can apply the experience of the gods to our own lives and what it means to us on a deeper, more spiritual level. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so I hope you'll come visit me at Blackbird's Brew. There's a link to join in the description box below. And of course, please subscribe to this channel, leave a comment, like the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.